In this lesson, you're going to get some tips on how to prepare for the listening section of the computer IELTS test. So one of the things to keep in mind, and this is something you probably got in other lessons you've listened to so far, is that the timing on the computer IELTS listening section is different from the timing on the listening section in the paper test. So on the paper exam, you have some time at the end of the listening section after you've listened to all 4 of the listening passages and answered all the questions. They give you 10 minutes to go back and transfer answers from your booklet that you have, the test booklet, over to the final answer sheet. Okay? This step of transferring answers is unnecessary on the computer IELTS, so they've removed it. Okay, so on the computer IELTS, as you probably know, the listening section is divided into 4 different parts. Okay, and before each section, before each dialogue or recording begins, you're going to have a little bit of time to look over the questions that you're going to need to answer. Okay, it's not a long time, about 30 seconds or so to look over the questions. At the end of each part, then, you're going to get some time to review answers. Again, not a long time, okay? Maybe 30 seconds or so, maybe a little more. You're going to get, in order to look over your answers, check spelling, just make sure things are entered the way you want them. Okay, and then instead of 10 minutes at the end of the entire listening exam, you're going to get 2 minutes, only 2 minutes to go back and check answers. Now you can check answers across the entirety of the 40 questions throughout the test, but that's not a lot of time to go back and thoroughly check the answers, right? So just be aware, you don't want to leave too many questions unanswered in the test for the end. You know, on the paper exam, it's different. You could write notes. You could maybe leave a lot of blanks sort of with question marks in your test booklet, and sort of, if you weren't sure the answer, you could have a little bit of time to think about it and enter your best guess on the final answer sheet. On the computer-delivered listening test, it's very different. You should try your best to enter your answers on the screen as you hear them, and enter your best possible guesses, even if you're not quite sure, because you don't have very much time at the end of the listening test to enter answers, to check spelling, to do any of that kind of stuff that you would have been able to do on the paper test. Okay, now some more details. This is advice that you'll get for the reading paper as well, the reading test. So there's a little bit different way of answering questions on the computer listening exam. And really what you need to do is just practice the different formats. It's not tough or difficult to learn. It's just different from the paper test. Okay, so you need to become familiar with a few things. You need to get familiar with filling out notes and diagrams, maps, things like that. You're going to do that just on the screen. Okay, you're going to enter answers directly into those visuals for the listening paper on the computer-based test. You're going to type short answers directly into blanks on the screen. Some answer choices, like matching questions, you're going to have to move around. You're going to drag them around the screen. Again, this is not challenging stuff, but you want to practice it ahead of time. So I've put a link down below this lesson. You can go to some official computer-based practice questions. You can try them out and just get a little practice moving things around the screen and entering answers. Okay, not so different from the paper test, and not so tricky to learn. You just want to know what you're doing before you actually go into the real exam on exam day. Okay, a few other details to keep in mind. Now, on the paper test, you can use a booklet, right, to scribble notes and possible answers. That's a nice thing to be able to do. Most people have a pretty easy time listening and scribbling notes with a pencil on a piece of paper or on the question booklet that you have in front of you, okay? But there's a key detail about the paper-based test that's very, very different from the computer-based listening test. On the paper exam, you can easily mark notes within the questions in the booklet, right? You've got the booklet in front of you, you've got your pencil, you can circle things in the questions, you can make notes that you can come back to later, and if you missed an answer or something, you can easily see your notes about that question if you were able to write any as you were listening. On the computer test, things are quite different. So they do give you some note paper, okay, but it isn't very easy to use effectively. Okay, so you're going to be, think about it, you're going to be typing answers into the screen as you listen, right? You're going to be scrolling, trying to make sure you're at the right place in the question set to enter your answers on the computer screen. And the idea that you're going to also do all of that and take notes with a pencil and paper as you're listening, that's really hard for a lot of people. And it's a really challenging thing to do well. And for a lot of people, it's kind of distracting to have to try to manage both of those things. My advice for the computer-based test is to avoid writing notes with pencil and paper, okay? And compared to what we saw above, the key detail about the paper test, well, you've got on the paper test, you've got a question booklet there where you're writing notes in the actual questions themselves. On the computer-based test, that note paper is blank. So any notes you take are removed from the context of those questions you're trying to answer, and that makes it more challenging as well. So again, my advice is, if you're taking the computer-based test, practice entering answers on the screen. You can try taking notes on a blank piece of paper as you're listening. See how that works for you. If you're able to manage both things, that's great. For many students, the advice is, though, don't get distracted by the paper. Do your best to answer questions on the screen and avoid writing notes. Okay, a final thing about the computer test here, just a formatting. On the bottom of the screen, on the computer-based exam, you're going to notice that you can click around to all the questions that you've answered in a particular section. And next to those, their little squares at the bottom of the screen, next to those squares at the very left side, you'll notice a review box. You can click review. When you're on a particular question, it turns the little question box into a circle, and that's a reminder for you to go back and review that question later. Only use this feature if you absolutely need it. Okay, remember, you only have 2 minutes at the end of the entire section. So if you have 1 or 2 questions that you feel you just couldn't answer and you need to go back and review, okay, you can use that feature to give you a visual reminder of the questions you want to go back and review. Okay, but if you have, as a strategy, you don't want to use it very much because you simply don't have much time to go back and review answers that you didn't figure out. Your best bet is to make a guess in the time when you're listening to the speaker or in the very short amount of time after each listening dialogue is finished to review the answers that you just provided. Okay, so it's there for you, this review feature, but my advice is to not overuse it and don't use it at all if at all possible. So to review, an important thing about the listening test is to understand and practice the timing. Again, I've got some practice questions, official practice questions that are for the computer-based listening test down for you to try out below. Those practice questions include the actual timing. So you, when you click start, you've got the amount of time, 30 seconds or so, to look over the answers before you answer the questions. And then afterwards, you'll know you get a little bit of time to review your answers. Recreate those exam conditions when you're answering these practice questions that you have down below or any other place that you're finding computer-based practice questions. The keys to doing well on the listening section are, as we discussed in this lesson, understanding the question formats and how to enter answers correctly. Again, something else you should practice from those official questions. Taking notes, whether or not you should take notes on paper, see if it works. Practice it. If it doesn't work for you, you should abandon taking notes for the computer-based test because it's either confusing or takes too much time. And at least it leads you away from listening closely and entering answers on the computer screen. And finally, we discussed how to review answers. You don't want to do it too much, but that possibility is there for you. Again, something you can see on those official practice questions if you click there down below. Okay, so those are some tips on how to do well on the computer-delivered IELTS listening section.